Starting part 2 of this chapter 4 lecture, we stopped talking about directional forces. Something that I haven't mentioned yet is that when it comes to lines, they usually have a particular behavior. If you see lines that are vertical up and down, they say that those types of shapes are usually standing still. And yes, this is all subjective. It all depends on the artist. It all depends on the viewer. And so if you see lines that are usually vertical, usually straight up and down, many people think of those types of directionals as standing still. So it's almost as if there's 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 they're meant to be held upright. If you see lines that are more horizontal, they are more lines that are being at rest. If you see lines that are in a diagonal, then those are lines that represent motion. Okay, and so again, these are not solidified definitions. It all really depends on the artist, but these types of lines have a tendency to have these behaviors. And so maybe we can agree to them or maybe we can disagree with them, but let's take a look at this example here. Francisco Goya bullfight, the agility and daring of Juanito Apinani, 1815. And so if you were to look at the overall composition, and if we were to think about things like directional forces, you can safely say that the figure draws a lot of our attention. He is being held up by this pole, and something that we might notice is that his body is at a diagonal, maybe somewhat close to a horizontal line. You'll notice that his eyes are looking down. His eyes are looking down, almost pointing at the end of that stick, and that is also a spot where the bull seems to be pointing as well. So they're sharing that same focal point. They're creating that diagonal uh, that draws us to that very center. You'll notice that the bull itself, the nose, and that the body is creating somewhat of an angle. Also, it's almost as though a triangle is being created. Something that we can notice, the pole is a vertical line, so we can say that the figure feels like it is standing still at the moment. But because the bull is at a diagonal, it feels like it is in movement. You can also say that the audience in the negative space, they too are, their eyes seem to gaze towards the direction of the bullfighter, and another adding on to that triangle that is being formed there. So a lot of interesting things going on with lines and diagonals and directionals. And this is a diagram of some of those lines that we can say are implied by the overall composition. A lot of these diagonals pointing to the tip of that stick there. Implied lines coming from the audience also towards that shadow, that direction. So many interesting lines contributing to these ideas of lines at rest, of lines that are standing still, also lines of movement. Okay, and there is that triangle being created really by the top of the stick, the shadow, and also the hind leg of the bull. Okay, and so you'll see this term being used a lot when it comes to things like composition is contrast. Contrast is this juxtaposition of strongly dissimilar elements. Think of things like dark against light. Think of things like large against small. So there's a contrast happening between these ideas. Contrast provides visual interest and expresses content. It's actually one of the things that we enjoy seeing when it comes to looking at works of art. We like to see contrast. We don't really want to see the same thing over again, even though repetition has a tendency to capture our attention. But the contrast is what what makes it a little bit more interesting. And so if we take a look at this work here, Kim McConnell, Woman with Mirror, canvas number 13, 2007. A lot of interesting contrasts happening here. Very abstract, latex acrylic on canvas, 48 inches by 48 inches, so a fairly large square painting, 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide. A lot of interesting contrasts happening within the composition, such as we have these diagonal lines, these triangles, standing parallel to a wavy line. So we have contrast. We have these diamond shapes that are within that space, creating. We see the white diamonds on blue triangles. Right next to it, we have orange stripes, and those are two totally contrasting elements. Blue and orange are complementary colors. You could say that these these lines are, we have diagonal lines next to horizontal lines. And so on the left side, we have a very interesting, the yellow there is balancing out the blue on the other side. So many different contrasts happening within one painting. And so rhythm is also important when it comes to these principles of design. Rhythm is any kind of movement or structure of dominant and subordinate sequence. And so when we are thinking about rhythm, we think of things like music. We think of an ongoing sound that in a way grounds us, that um, we are evaluating, we are determining, is the song, is it a fast song, is it a slow song, and all of that is really decided by or created by the rhythm. And so we think, okay, it's the same, say, element over and over again, which is a pattern. And so what is the difference? What is the difference between a pattern and rhythm? Well, rhythm is something that deals with movement, and that's the difference. So you can say that music has a tendency to fluctuate. It feels like it's not. It feels like there's a little bit of of changing, of change, and so that is enough to make it more of a rhythm over it being a pattern, where it's a pattern is more in one area, and it doesn't exactly move. And if we look at this here, Donald Judd, Untitled, 1990, repetition lends unity, continuity, flow, and emphasis. It's basically the same shape over and over again. And because of the alignment, because of the height of the objects, and that if we can imagine actually being in the physical space of a gallery, and if we were to stand next to this piece, it is fairly tall, 14 feet high. So in a way, we have to move around it. We have to look up, in that when we are looking up and then we are looking down, we are feeling the sense of movement. And so we're not exactly looking at the same things over again. Instead, we are looking at it from the more, looking at objects more from the bottom, more from uh, this diagonal. And so our vantage point often changes. And so it's more about it's more about rhythm opposed to pattern here. Okay? Sometimes works or paintings themselves have rhythm in it, not only because of the composition, but also the subject matter. And so we are looking at a composition here that is very influenced by the Cubist style. And so we are looking at these variables of darks and lights, these interesting organization of shapes and circles and rectangles. And so we can say that rhythm is embedded in not just the subject matter because we are looking at a musical instrument, we are looking at abstract depiction of uh, a music player, musician. We see some abstract shapes of instruments, but also the rhythm that's happening with this abstraction, with the darks to lights within each of those individual shapes. Interesting rhythm with even the warm colors towards the lower portion of the overall painting, the light browns and the light oranges, the warm colors in the fingers. We have a lot of interesting rhythmic characteristics going on. Lyubov Popova, the pianist, 1915. And so this is a good example of how rhythm can be seen from a 2D work of art, a painting. And so if we look at this example here, and right away we think, yeah, it's the same object over and over again. And so we think pattern, but because of this idea that they are moving forward, we have these cranes. It feels like their feet are portraying a sense of them walking forward, that they are marching the same direction. Suddenly it becomes more about rhythm. We like to look for rhythm in many things. Ogata Korin, crane's 1700th century. Very large gold leaf painting. So we have rhythm happening with the birds. We have the bird's feet, the eyes and the beaks and the feathers. We have these interesting rhythmic elements going on throughout the whole piece. A lot of flatness, but at the same time, a lot of movement. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about scale and proportion. Scale is the size relation of one thing to another. You could think of how big will the work be. I feel like scale and size is the same, is used in the same manner when it comes to describing the objects. You can use scale, you can use size, same thing. Proportion, on the other hand, is the size relationships of parts to a whole. So we like to break it down. We like to compare it, the proportion of, say, one part of an object to the whole thing. If we look at this example here, we are looking at how scale plays a really big part in terms of how we feel, how we describe these objects. If you look at the circles in the center of the left, if we look at the circle in the center, center of this left side here, it is a smaller circle being surrounded by what, 6 larger circles. The circle in the middle feels very small, but if you look at that, if we look at the circle on the right, if we look at the right side of this diagram, it is actually that same size circle, but around it are 6 smaller circles. And so in a way, it kind of amplifies the size of that object in the center. Even though we're looking at two of the same, if we were to look at these center circles on both sides, they are the exact same, but because of its surroundings, it feels very different. So the objects are visually relative. It changes based on its surroundings. Okay, and so if we take a look at this work here, not a painting, it's actually a very large sculpture. It's not a photoshopped photo. It's not a Photoshop picture of a manipulated image. The object here is really that large. So a very large birdie that people use in playing badminton is right in front of this William William Rockhill Nelson Gallery of Art. And so, what the artist did here, Oldenburg, gets these mundane objects, blows them up in scale, 1,000 times its normal size, so that as we approach these objects, that we feel different. We look at these everyday objects in different light. Okay, and so this is actually one of four, Oldenburg and Van Bruggen. Very large size, and because of that, it changes our, say, the interpretation of the object changes because of its scale. And so something that I like to tell my students when it comes to drawing, if you want to make strong work, you have to try to draw large. Not if you do a lot of strong work in a smaller scale, it won't gather that much attention, and that's just the reality. Okay, so scale plays a large role in the way we look at works of art. This work here, Crucero du Sol, Southern Cross by Zildo Meirelles. He has a very small object on his finger, and that is basically his work of art. Or this is one of his pieces. He has actually very many, and he makes a lot of work that is very social. In this case, he purposely creates a very small wooden cube here due to this idea that in the southern hemisphere of the Americas, especially in the Latin and the the Central and South American countries, there's this idea that they contribute so much to the whole world. They contribute a lot of exports, especially things like coffee, but also wood. A lot of wood is being exported out of the South and Central Americas. And that even though they provide so much of this valuable material to the whole world, they don't actually get recognized for it. Instead, the Middle and South Americans, they don't really get recognition for their accomplishments. And so that's what the idea is behind this work here. And so the artist finds a way to create a statement just from playing around with scale. Okay, so some other things that deal with scale and proportion when it comes to these principles of design. One of them is format. Format is referring to a size and shape of a two-dimensional picture plane. Format can be seen through these examples. The paper that we use on an everyday basis, especially for school, are 8.5 by 11 sheets, 8.5 by 11 inches, and that is the standard format in terms of what we are using to write with. Another example of format is television screens. The widescreens of today's standards are around this size, 16:9 format. So something that you'll notice, the format of how we view television changes through time. So before, television was more like a square. It was more like a square, and later they decided that they can actually, that the human eye can see, they're incorporating more of their peripheral vision, so it's okay to make the screens wider, and so they just kept pushing that idea. And now the screens are very, very wide. It mentions here that the change in proportion can make a difference in the viewer's experience of a subject, and that is very true. When we watch television, if we watch movies, we like to watch it in the large screen. It's just way more exciting. And so if we take a look at this work here, another work from the Renaissance. And so this is the the very popular scene where Jesus is let down from the cross and that he is in the lap of Mary, and this is called the Pietà. Okay, very very fitting for now. I mean, it's Holy Week, right? So yes, this is a scene of the Pietà done by Michelangelo. And so I actually put a link to the this piece here on our Canvas page. So check it out. The closer look, you can get a lot of information. Check out all of those other things in the modules. But anyways, something about the Pietà done by Michelangelo is that if you look at Mary, let me go back to the larger work here. If you see how Mary is being portrayed, she is quite tall, and that because Jesus is has died and that she is in his lap, and that in a way he feels he is supposed to appear lifeless, but at the same time, then Michelangelo portrays Mary. She feels very tall in comparison to him, but also not just the length, but the width. If you look at her clothing and that her arms are outstretched, that her arm is in a blessing gesture. If we incorporate that alongside the fabric surrounding the body, it makes her body feel very large. And Michelangelo does this purposely to make her, in a way, the point of emphasis, making Mary very important in this overall scene. Okay, 5 feet by 8 inches, and that, yes, very larger than life. Okay, and so here is another work, another Pietà scene done by a different artist, but done in a very different style. Röntgen Pietà made 1300, so around 100 earlier before Michelangelo's version, but something about this is the exaggeration of the portrayal of Christ, and that his body is a lot thinner, and that he, there's a little bit more say emotions of sadness, of melancholy, and the artist purposely makes him appear that way and to give more life to Mary. Okay, so a little summary to close up design. Design is not inevitable and may result from multiple changes and decisions. You can say that whenever artists create works, it's not something that they can just do right away. It's actually the result of many decisions. And so if we take a look at this work here by Henri Matisse, State 1 of a Large Reclining Nude, May 3rd, 1935. The figure is quite representational, some hints of I'm not going to say inaccuracies, but abstraction. You could say that the head looks a little bit small compared to the rest of the body. The proportions aren't exactly there. Is that the point of Matisse's work here? Not exactly. And so let's see what he ends up doing with this original design, this original composition. He gets the same work, but then he exaggerates the forms. He makes the body larger. If you look behind the figure, you'll notice that he added more lines, and those are actually cutouts. So this is his process in terms of how he decides on his design. He does a little bit of collage, similar to the things that we've been making in class. So the body looks different now. You can see the exaggeration of the elbow. It feels like now it's creating more of a vertical line, opposed to before it was slightly at an angle. You can see that the arm that is that is on the bottom, that Matisse is trying to bring that elbow back in, or keep that elbow out but bring the rest of the arm back in. And again, these interesting addition of lines in the back. So here's another version, simplifying some of these shapes, somehow bring the body a little bit more back into proportion, but still somewhat exaggerated, in that the overall background feels a little bit more concise, that the lines are cleaner, that the lines are exaggerated. It doesn't seem like the figure is on the surface it it initially was modeled on. And so some interesting things happening with the overall composition here. And here is the original, or the final piece. This is how it ended up looking in the end. Everything is more exaggerated. The color plays a really big part, and that Matisse is a very interesting artist in that he purposely makes these works that are very expressive. Um, it's not meant to be accurate by any means, but more of a portrayal, his own portrayal of the figure and this then the still life combined. But yes, when it comes to design, many things can happen. The artist can change his, overall composition just to exaggerate things. They want to emphasize things. They want to subordinate things to make the overall picture more interesting. But I hope you guys learned something from this chapter. It's very terminology heavy. Ask me if you have any questions. Don't be shy to message me. um, but yes, look forward to more of our lectures. I'll post them as soon as I have them ready. Again, let me know if you guys need any help, and I'll talk to you again soon.